Okay, and we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Litquake on Lockdown. I'm Jack Bower from Litquake, San Francisco's literary festival and nonprofit. This is the final event of our virtual spring and summer series, which streams live to the Bay Area and throughout the world. We created these programs to highlight those authors who were not getting the opportunity for a physical book tour, and there's a lot of them, like most of the people who had books this year. So please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram for the latest updates, and stay tuned for news of our festival coming this October 8th through the 24th. Tonight we are honored, and I do not use that word lightly, I am honored, to be able to present Peter Orner in conversation with Paul Madonna to discuss Peter's brilliant new paperback story collection, Maggie Brown and Others, which was just released 2 days ago from Back Bay Books. This collection is a series of 44 interlocking stories and one novella, and throughout the book, it's amazing. From a first date that turns into a late night road trip to a séance in an abandoned airplane hangar, to a family's memories of the painful mystery surrounding a neglected uncle's demise, Peter Orner reveals how our fleeting decisions between kindness and abandonment chase us across time. There are so many gushing reviews of this book, both for the hardback last year and for the paperback. I'm just going to share a few. The New York Times says, quote, "You know from the second you pick him up that he's the real deal. His sentences are lit from below like a swimming pool with a kind of resident yearning that's impossible to fake." The Chicago Tribune says, "Writing doesn't get any better." And from the Washington Post, "Pick it up, trust me." I know, right? So Peter Orner is a two-time recipient of the Pushcart Prize and is the author of 5 previous books, including the novels Love and Shame and Love and the collection Esther Stories. His memoir, Am I Alone Here?, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and his fiction has appeared in The Atlantic, the Paris Review, Tin House, and Granta, and has been anthologized in the Best American Short Stories. He is the recipient of the Rome Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Fulbright to Namibia. Peter holds the Dartmouth Professorship of English and Creative Writing at Dartmouth College. He will be in conversation with Paul Madonna, who is an award-winning artisan writer here from San Francisco. He's the creator of 3 series, All Over Coffee, Small Potatoes, and Quotable City, which runs in the Nob Hill Gazette currently. He is also author of 4 books, All Over Coffee, Everything is Its Own Reward, On to the Next Dream, and Close Enough for the Angels. His drawings and stories have appeared internationally in numerous publications, galleries, and museums. And this October, we should rename Paul Madonna Month, because he releases 2 books this October: the novel Come to Light, and also with journalist Gary Camilla, Spirits of San Francisco, Voyages Through the Unknown City. So a few details before we begin. Please feel free to ask Peter and Paul a question using the Q&A feature of this software at the bottom of your screen. Just click the little Q&A button. You can also support both of them today by visiting your favorite independent bookstore and purchasing their books, or also go to bookshop.org if you like. We also ask for your support of the Litquake organization to allow us to continue events like this. We have done about 30 of these since the pandemic began in March, and this is the final one for the series. So you can support us by visiting us at litquake.org. We appreciate any donation you can spare. So that's enough for me. Let's listen to Peter and Paul, and here they are.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, am I live?
I think you're live.
All right. Peter, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Paul. So good to see you.
Congratulations on the paperback of Maggie. That was 2 days ago, right?
Yeah, I think may have been yesterday. So we're even 1 day out. So.
And also, I believe
available in the local bookstore that y'all can't go to, apparently.
and if I'm correct, you also just won a 3rd Pushcart.
I did, yeah. A story from this book was chosen for next year's Pushcart. Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations on that. That's fantastic.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Before we start, I want to say thank you to Jack and to Litquake for doing this. I mean, we're all in a crazy time. I don't think we need to be reminded of that. But everybody who is pulling together to put together these type of series and who are willing to figure out how we can all come together and support the arts again is amazing. So I want to thank you guys so much for keeping the series going and for having Peter and myself on.
Can everybody hear me okay? Because somebody's saying turn up my mic, which I appreciate. But is it okay? Does it sound okay to you, Paul?
I can hear you, but it's funny. I can't see you on my end, but I don't know what that means. Maybe oh, I think
I can see you. It's better. You seeing me is not important. Me seeing you is much more
no,
important.
I need to see it.
Can I just say one thing about Jack and Litquake real quick? And I just want to say that I want to thank Jack and Jane, Jack Bower, Jane Ganal for not just what they've done for writers and readers this year, but they've gone above and beyond last year and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before. I mean, my first Litquake was in Yerba Buena Gardens on a little stage, and and Litquake has grown. But I think the philosophy of Litquake, giving voice to me and so many other people, is just and I'm not surprised that they stepped up and created this entire reading series, which is one of the biggest ones going under COVID. So I just want to give a big shout out to Jack and Jane and my appreciation, which goes back very far, which is I'm sure you've been working with. I know you've been working with them for a long time too, Paul.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm glad you said so. I think you and I are very much the same in that one of the things we love and part of our creative process is being out in the world, walking around, eavesdropping, just letting the sights, the smells, the sounds of the world around us influence us. How has the lack of being able to do that been for your creative process recently?
We're so much the same that we dress alike because we got the same shirts on. That's been really hard. I mean, so many things about this are very, very hard, but I just, in my own small hardness of what it's been like to live under lockdown, is that much of my work really comes from eavesdropping and being around people and being just around the sort of, I just like to be around people anonymously and like to watch them. And that's been hard when you do that now. You get more funny looks. Nobody wants to be anywhere near you, which makes a lot of sense. But I feel like it's cut me off from my primary source, and that's been difficult and shifted me in my head more, which is, fine. I got a lot of memories I can work with, but I part of the torque of my work, and just having read your work over the years, I'm not surprised that it would be a similar experience. That I can tell you, I know you get stuff from walking around.
And also, for me, whenever I finish a project, going out in the world is how I refill my well, because so much of a project, you end up, inside your head, in your studio, in your workspace, and where are you in your other projects? Like, I know the paperback came out, but the hardback came out, last year. So I know that book's been in the can for a while. Are you actively engaged in work, or where are you with your writing practice at the moment?
I hope my editor's not on here. But I'm working very hard on this novel, Ben. It's every single day I'm putting in 8 hours, and it's going fantastic. I'll have it in on deadline. It's the best book I've done, and you're gonna love it. And the truth would be that it's a little similar to, I don't want to bring you down, but I did a memoir, kind of essay collection memoir a few years ago, and that sort of grew out of my not being able to write much fiction, to be honest. And what I did in that case is I retreated into books that then I sort of would take notes on, and that kept me moving, it kept me going. And so in this environment, feeling just a little bit shut down and isolated, I find myself turning to the writers that I love again and just sort of being with them a lot. And then, you know, if I get some work done on this book, which I am doing, I swear, that's good. But I guess I'm trying to just step back and not feel so rushed. And so, does that make sense?
Well, that's interesting you talk about being rushed, because if I'm correct, the stories in Maggie span almost 20 years, right?
Some two or three of them are, you know, started in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I was able to, you know, at that time sort of focus on them because I was away. And so it worked out that way. But it does take me, stories take me a very long time, as I know they do for you. It just, I sit on them for forever. And so I guess it's not totally different from what I normally do, but right now I'm not even necessarily writing complete stories. I'm just writing thoughts, if that.
Well, one of the things that I love about your work so much is that you can compress what I feel like is an entire novel into a short story. And in essence, all the components are there, but they're stripped down in their most basic form. And you can do in one sentence what it takes other authors an entire chapter or sometimes an entire book to do. And when I read your sentences, I feel like you anticipate what I'm anticipating, and then you turn it as if we were in all of this was happening in real time. And I would think something like that, it would take a lot of time to look at those sentences over and over again and find your story in each one. How much do you think about it that way? Do you think about it that way at all in terms of individual sentences?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I wasn't obsessive in this way, but I feel like when it's going well, and most of the time it's not going well. You know, today it did not go well at all. You know, and I wandered around a neighborhood where no one was outside. You know, looking for people to watch so I could have an idea. But when it's going well, I think. And it's so hot in here, by the way. I'm like, if I start to melt on the screen, call the paramedics. But I feel like when it's going well, it's because I'm having the patience not to rush the line.
Yeah.
Or even the paragraph, and God forbid, rush the story. And I'll sit on it and wait. I'll rewrite it. I'll sit on it until finally it just feels like, you know, it becomes independent of me, and then I can't, you know, and then I can't work on it anymore. But that doesn't mean it's done or better or anything. It just means I've exhausted the possibilities.
And in terms of a short story collection, are there, you know, is it like a mixtape for you? Is it that you're collecting over all these years? And are you writing stories following ones that you already have finished that you feel as companion pieces? How do you start to flesh out what you think of as an entire collection being one cohesive piece?
It's a great question. I wish I had an answer that was coherent.
Rambling will be fun.
Right. Don't let me ramble. But
we did have an agreement. Yeah,
right, we did. I will say this, that they have, on an individual basis, they gotta work. And then, so if you've got a piece that will work independent of things, then what I find is the fun part is then if I have this other independent piece that somehow that will work on its own, for better or for worse, it'll be what it is. If it can somehow play off of some other piece by some usually accident, I'm pleased about that. And then I'll be like, oh, I got two. All right. They can talk to each other a little bit. And then this other one might come in. And I have a lot of fun sort of moving things around as puzzle pieces when I'm finished with individual pieces. But I can't do that until an individual piece is done.
And do you ever have any where you've finished one and that has sparked another story because you realize there is a companion to it, be it in tone or in subject matter, or even, I mean, I know you draw a lot from your own personal history, and does it bring up memories, or basically spawn new stories?
I mean, I want to ask you the same question, but it seems like work begets work. If I
Right.
don't work, then, and if so today was a bad day, but at least I was sort of trying, and then, so maybe something will have generated from that. But yeah, what I do find is if a piece somehow individually will work, that will sort of be like, oh, okay, I can still do that. I can still do it. I have this anecdote I always tell my students and myself. Joseph Brodsky, the great Russian poet, said something to the effect of, an airline pilot, if he lands the plane 5,000 times, he knows on the 501st time, he's going to land it okay. I think in our world, in our work, 5,000 times success it means a plane crash on the 5,001st, and so I think you can never be overconfident about it. And I think maybe underconfidence is the secret.
Well, that's interesting. It makes me think of a quote that you had from an interview you did a while ago, and you were asked what had changed about your writing process over the years, and actually have what you said here. You said that if anything, meaning you said you feel less confident that you're going to be able to make a story work, and I thought that was interesting because there's an inherent contradiction in that I've landed the plane 5,000 times, and then you're coming in for the runway going, can I actually land this again? But at the same time, it makes a lot of sense because you have to be present to land it that 5,001st time, or else the plane won't land. Do you still feel that that you're less confident than you were when you were younger in making a story work?
Totally. I can just remember, I mean, not to sound like back in the old days, but I can remember like just being able to, like, everything was a story, and I was just, the ideas were coming, and it was just, I couldn't control it. And I couldn't sleep for the ideas, and I would just be, and it just, that, I don't know, maybe it's having, kind of doing it for a while, you get a little jaded, but you can't get, just because the ideas don't come the way they used to, doesn't mean you can be confident that you can do it. I think you have to create that a little bit. So I have to almost manufacture that kind of excitement sometimes, because it doesn't feel that way anymore.
Do you think it's because the excitement at that time, it was a new energy? It was something that you could be swept away by, because it was almost like, I have this wonderful feeling, I'm inspired. And now, not that you're jaded, but it's like when inspiration comes, you can write it and it feels wonderful, but you do know what it feels like. Maybe I should ask, is it still as much of a beautiful surprise to be swept away by inspiration as it used to be?
That's the thing. I mean, it's, I feel like, I feel very lucky that I can do what I do, and that it's a lot fewer, but I'll like talk to myself in my studio. I'll just I'll just get so giddy. Like I remember like an early story of mine, it's called Shoe Story. I saw some shoes on the street, and I imagined that someone had she'd thrown the shoes at her lover in anger, and then the shoe ended up on the street. And I remember writing it, and I sat down on the curb and wrote the story. It's called Shoe Story. It's kind of a ridiculous story, but I was, that giddy moment, I was like, I got it. That can still happen. And I'm constantly chasing it, constantly, and it feels like maybe, it's maybe harder to come by, but things weigh heavier on me than they used to.
I can relate to that. There's also the knowledge that just because you're willing it to happen doesn't mean that it will happen. You have to, you can't turn off your brain to say, I need to accidentally find something, when you're consciously looking to find something.
Right.
It makes me think, there's a story, and you want to read this story. I think it's a good time for it. It's called A Poet is Dying in Bolinas. And it makes me think of the of this idea of looking and discovering, and it's about an author that you see in the background of a photo in City Lights. And do you want to read that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's a brief piece, so don't worry, everybody. I know how these things can be when a writer's like, time for me to read, so sit back. No, this is 2 pages, so don't worry. It's called An Old Poet is Dying in Bolinas, and I can give a little backstory maybe after. Is that cool, Paul?
Yeah, and I actually have some questions for you.
Great. A lesser known beat poet. There were others like him, unfamous names who made the beats, scrawling in dirty notebooks in cafes, typing in unheated North Beach apartments, wearing gloves with the tips of their fingers cut off. You can still see his face on the wall at City Lights. He's standing in a photograph in a row of poets behind Ferlinghetti and Ginsberg, hardly recognizable because he still had a full head of hair then. He'd come to California from Minneapolis and found poetry and women. In the City Lights picture, he's wearing a ferocious grin. He's a foot soldier in Ginsberg's army of jesters. He'd kill for poetry, sure, but honey baby, wouldn't it be more fun if we fucked for it? By the time I came to know him, he was still smiling. He smiled all the time. I believe he was one of those rare birds, a truly happy soul. I used to see him in the bar when he could still walk, shuffling around, dancing by himself. He lived off poetry and the many women who'd come and gone over the decades. More off the women than the poetry, he'd be the first to say. The women who'd come and the women who'd gone, in and out of his little one-room cabin up on the mesa. The place smelled of mold and rot, old books and unwashed sheets. His eyes don't quite work anymore, but he still lies in bed holding a book over his face. What else are my hands good for? He doesn't write anymore either. Thank Eros, he still has filthy dreams. A man who used to write 10, 20, 30 poems a day. Sometimes, though, even now, a line will emerge out of the fog of morning. The only defense against man's envy is not to be enviable. Who said that? Did I say that? Why not? Now I can say I've said everything. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your toes, and he'll laugh till his ribs hurt. He'll take the pain over emptiness. Every night, an old friend, his neighbor from across the road, sits beside his bed and reads him to sleep. Every once in a while, she pauses and says, "Aren't you weary, Henry? Would you like me to stop?" And he answers, "Yes, it is. Isn't it wonderful?" And when he's alone, those long hours, he's awake and waiting for the dawn to creep through the windows. He listens to the ocean and considers the total uselessness of sleep when there's nobody beside you. He never had much talent. He'd always known it. Ginsberg himself once said, "Don't worry, Hank, you got a poetic face." And he thinks about how they used to call out, how when they approached his cabin, they always, before knocking, called out his name.
So when I first read that, the question that came to mind was, well, I wanted to go to City Lights and look at the wall of photos in the staircase, but I wanted to know if this was somebody that you found in the photo, or somebody you made up, or somebody you had befriended. And what I like is that I can't answer it from the story. The story sort of hovers in that place where I want to ask the question. And so is this a real writer, and did you know him?
Bolinas is, and there's Bolinas people on the call. Everybody in Bolinas is a poet, right? You can't go 2 feet without running into a poet. So sure. I mean, Bolinas is a very special place to me, and you're not supposed to talk about it publicly. You're supposed to pretend it doesn't exist and no one can find it, as if, right? Back in the old days when they used to steal the signs and so no one could find it. Those days have ended since the Google millionaires found Bolinas. But anyway, billionaires. What was I saying? Yes, I once in Bolinas, I was a member of the fire department, and one of the great things I could do as a volunteer, I mean, I was helping out as a volunteer. That was my job, but I would also go into a lot of people's houses. I mean, that was sort of what you do when you are called to a scene of somebody having trouble. And I met a poet of this, kind of that was living in a tiny one-room place, and literally scraps of paper all over the cabin were poems he was working on. So he was roughly based on that gentleman. But also, there's so many poets from San Francisco that we don't know about. We know the famous ones, and even the not quite so famous ones. Bob Kaufman, I watched a documentary about him last night. What an amazing guy. Jack Spicer, people like this. And then there's all these other ones that hundreds of them. And I just think it's a beautiful thing to think about people who wrote to express themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're also part of the scene, right? They're part of the community, and I mean that's who they read their poems to. They listened to their friends' poems. I mean that's what they did. They gathered in cafes, and I think there's always the myth of the lone creator, right? Or see even the thinking of Hemingway in Paris in the 1920s or something. But and even he writes as if he's alone, he's the only one. But really, there's a flood of people. Everybody's there practicing their craft, and they're all inspiring each other.
Right.
You brought up being a volunteer fireman, and I wanted to talk to you about that because, well, one, it's a noble thing to do, but my grandfather
my
was
favorite topic to talk about. I always try to steer the conversation that way. Now, go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
No, please talk about it because I mean I'm interested in any of your thoughts on it. But one of my questions is the interesting sort of difference between the writing practice. The writing practice is the opposite of a house on fire, right? Like if it's not working, you walk away from it. You can forget about it for a day, a month, a year, whatever. You never return to that story. But a fire, you are 100% in the moment. And is there something about does that balance the writing practice for you, or does the writing practice balance the firefighter?
My first fire, I literally, I was all packed up. It was a barn on fire across the street from where I lived, actually. And the charge of the hose was so powerful. And I should have been prepared for this. But the charge of the hose was so powerful, literally it knocked me on my ass. The hose, which I was on the end of the hose, was literally pointing up into the air and not at the fire. And the farmer, whose barn it was, literally had to put me upright so that he could point the hose into the fire. Right. It was, the teasing was merciless back after that fire. But I guess I've always been a kid who would see a fire truck and run over to it and literally follow it. In San Francisco, I would always follow and see what was going on. I'd turn off the road and follow the fire trucks. I mean, I'm one of those freaks. And so when I moved to Bolinas, there was a sign at the grocery store. It said, you want to volunteer? And I said, sure. And they said, what experience do you have? I said, none. And they said, that's okay. And it was so good to me. And it was so out of my element that it did. It's nice to turn your brain off to do something. I don't do anything technical. I mean, I'm looking behind you, Paul, and you've got your pens and, all the things that you do to create the remarkable imagery that you create. And I don't have any of those sort of technical things. So it was fascinating to me to learn how the pump works and how the hydrant works and all this sort of science that I had always ignored. But the other part of it is I got to meet people, and I got to meet people maybe I wouldn't normally meet. And there's a certain mercenary quality that I get to go in houses in the middle of the night, and that fits right squarely in. I shouldn't even be proud of this, but it fits squarely into what I like to do, which is observe people. So there's that.
It gives you a justified reason.
Right. Right, because
But
I'm wearing this coat that makes me look like I'm there to help. When generally I am, but I'm still watching.
Yeah.
So.
And do you think the physicality of it? And I mean, you're a bicyclist. One of the things I remember in San Francisco is you used to bike to teach, and it was I forget where you lived at the time, but you biked quite a distance to teach, and I like that about the fact that you would do this really physical thing to then go and do this very cerebral thing. And do those work in conjunction with each other?
I mean, I never thought about it that way, but I'm sure that's it. And it also like the biking gets me around parts of the city that I wouldn't normally go to. I mean, I would bike from my apartment in Presida Park to San Francisco State, and I would usually take like over by Monterey, and then I would always kind of figure out these side streets. So I would kind of learn every, it's sort of, you go through Glen Park and I don't know, just parts of the city that it's, I miss San Francisco so much, so it's hard for me. I get emotional, but I think that's just part of it. And also, I never had time to work out because I had kids, so I had to get to work.
Just give you an excuse.
Exactly.
Well, I know that for me, and I know this for you too. Walking activates my brain. It's how I work out, problems or even story problems. But being on the bike is what turns the brain off, because you're looking for cars, you're gauging your body, you're going up and down hills in San Francisco. But there's such a different physical activities, and there are times when I need to be on my bike, and there are times when I just need to be on my feet.
Do you ever write on your bike? Do you ever take notes on your bike? Do you got your pad with you?
Oh, do I ever write?
Yeah, stop and
Oh, of course, always. And I also have a camera on me because I'll pass something, a building or a corner with great light on it, and I'm like, oh, I got to come back here and draw. So I'm constantly stopping to jot a note down or take a reference photo.
And you covered a lot of corners in San Francisco. Are there still corners that you're like, oh my God, I never noticed that, because it has to do with the time of the day?
Yeah, very much so. My biggest problem is that I find that I'm drawn towards similar compositions. And so I might come across a new building I haven't seen, or a new corner that is beautiful. I want to render it, but I realize what I'm into is it's like, oh, it's this 4:30 light, and then the shadows are falling really long off the bay windows or something. And I realize I've done that drawing before, not of this specific place, but I've stood in the relationship to this type of building at this type of light. And so my challenge then is to say, well, if it's a beautiful subject, then I need to come back at another time. I need to, it's almost like if you were a portrait artist or a photographer and you just put the same light on every subject, as opposed to trying to find the light that they look best in. And so that's my challenge these days.
So it's like you make a slight recalibration, or an hour, day at a time of day calibration. Interesting.
Yeah, like now I have to go. I'll go back and scout a place 5 times. And I'll do it over the course of months even, and I keep detailed notes. I'm like, oh, here's morning light in the spring. Here's afternoon light in the fall or something. And sometimes I'll just keep these notes, and it'll take me years to do one drawing. If I haven't agreed to do it for if it's not a commission, or if it's not for a book, if I'm just for myself.
I find this repetition so fascinating. Just that we're drawn to, like, I don't know, today I was writing a story that I know I've written before.
Mm-hmm.
What it has to do is it's a story about just somebody I knew whose brother was killed young. And I've written a number of these. I don't know why I'm drawn to that idea, but I was just thinking, like, is it okay? And I mean, you're giving me sort of just a slight change of the aperture or angle or whatever, because I like the fact that I look at your work and I see a certain kind of almost ritualistic repetition that is slightly different, or in some cases radically different. But what you're drawn to, we start becoming drawn to it, in the same building in a different light, or same intersection. And I just love that idea. I think as a fiction writer, that helps me immensely.
Well, it makes me think of Henry Miller said that he basically wrote one book. and every one of his books, like he saw them as the same book. He just kept writing over and over again, just different lengths in different contexts. Or also, Leonard Cohen saying that he pretty much he wrote 3 songs in his life. And, how many albums did he make, and how many songs did he write? But that in essence, he could tell you any of those songs were just one of the 3 that were remade. And so I think that, which is to say that this is a recurring theme amongst creative people, right?
But I think, like, when do you reach a point where it's okay? Where you feel okay that, I mean, Henry Miller, and certainly the critics certainly thought he wrote the same book, that's for sure. But, like, when do we say, you know what, it's okay that I'm doing that? Like, and, but I think what you're talking about, like this slight recalibration just is so, it's not the same. A slight recalibration, Giacometti, those sculptures aren't the same. Your work is never the same. So,
well, I suppose the question is, even the recalibrations, does the audience perceive them as recalibrations, or do they perceive them as, oh, that's another, it's a beautiful or exciting or interesting story or drawing or sculpture, or whatever. And maybe that's what is sort of the difference between what goes on behind the scenes and what we see in terms of product, for lack of a better word. And I mean, how can you answer that about yourself? Like, I mean, you have 2 collections of short stories, and there's time between them. But would you say that though you wrote the same stories, but with calibration? You know what I mean? How would you answer that in those 2 books?
I mean, there's a novella in this latest book in Maggie Brown that basically tells a story, a novella that I told in the first book, Esther Stories. It involves I was fascinated by my grandparents' marriage, that I thought it was the only marriage in my orbit, in my family orbit, that felt like a happy marriage. So I was drawn to it. I was fascinated by it. The problem is my grandfather died really young. He died at 59. So my grandmother lived without him for over 25, 30 years, right? And so I've been obsessed in my whole writing life about what those 2 were like before he passed away. And that's what I did in Esther Swords, and I did it again this time, and it was called Fall River Marriage, and now it's called Walt Kaplan is Broke, but it's the same story. And but if I looked at them again, I changed a lot. The writing's changed a lot. What I was trying to find has changed, I guess. But the core question of what kind of these 2 people who are a complete mystery to me still remains.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to do one more thing, and then we're going to read another piece. But it just made me think of a story that you wrote. I think it's in Bridge Over. Sorry, I have the book right here. Last Car Over the Sagamore Bridge. Now, I have to look to find it, but remind me, there's a story where there's a couple, and they tell a story over and over again. I think it's about a ship sinking or something, and then we find out that maybe they were never on the ship. Am I remembering this wrong?
I mean, this is fascinating to me because I often talk about with my classes, like, talk about a story where you tell in your family over and over again, and why do you tell it? Because you already know the answer, and you like it because it's just the excitement of telling the story over again. What you're talking about is actually a fire. Speaking of fires, I think it was I had an uncle who claimed much of his life to have been in the Coconut Grove fire in Boston, which was one of the worst commercial restaurant fires in American history. It was a nightclub. I forget the numbers. They were astounding, the numbers. It was, similar to the ghost ship horror, but I think a lot more people died in this at the Coconut Grove. And for some reason, my uncle Morris talked for years about having been in it, but my grandmother once let out that he was lying, that he wasn't in the fire, that was and that it was it was him and his wife, my aunt and uncle, were, for some reason, they wanted to own, like people do, they want to be part of the action. So they went to Coconut Grove. Well, at least my grandmother said they were full of shit. So anyway, I think that's the story you're talking about. It sounds like.
No, that's the story. And the reason that it popped to mind was because it seems like that in a way is what we're doing when we return to, making the same piece of art or writing the same song or writing the same story. We have something that we're compelled that we want to keep sharing with people. And even if we weren't there, we want to keep going.
No, what was the harm? What was the harm? Except that I guess what the harm was is that if you're obsessed with having been in a fire, I mean, what I tried to do in that story is I tried to actually test it. Like, what if you had been in the fire, Uncle Morris? What if you had been? What if you truly had been? Like clawing the people trying to get out. I was obsessed and read a lot of stuff about it. It was really rough. If you actually had been. So stories aren't to be fucked with, right? I mean, tell them at your peril, I guess is what I was after in that story.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so how about we have you read one more piece?
Sure.
And then we can get to some audience questions. Great.
I'm going to read a story called Naked Man Hides, just because. It's a California story based on something I read in the newspaper about a guy in a car accident who was naked. So here it goes. Everybody knows this. Sometimes you lose everything, including your clothes. I must have taken them off at some point after the crash. I can't remember. I must have felt hot. How else to explain why I took off all my clothes? Helene came to jail the next morning and showed me the paper, and we even laughed about it at first. Above the fold, naked man hides after crash. They'd never given anybody much of a reason to buy the independent journal before. I should get a cut of the sales. Helene says Helene said she hadn't come to bail me out this time. I said, when have you ever come to bail me out? That's when she started to cry. She wanted to understand what I'd become. She wanted me to understand what I'd become as if I didn't know it. She thought shoving a headline in my face would help me see in black and white what everybody else saw. Not just our kids, my parents, her parents, my sister, but everybody in San Rafael. You went to college to end up in here? I told her if I had any shame left, I'd yank it out of my throat and stuff it down again. Helene threw the paper on the floor and stood up and knocked on the little window to let the guard know she wanted out. She stooped, picked up the paper, and left. Maybe she'll paste the article in one of her scrapbooks. They brought me back to the cell, and I sat there and trembled for hours. It was hell, of course, but it's also a little like having the chills when you've got the flu. You're grateful because that seizing your body's doing helps keep you warm. I'd gone from so hot to so cold. Must have been sitting there for hours. And I remember at some point they tried to give me lunch. I couldn't look at the food. Same later on with the dinner tray. Before lights out, they brought in 2 new guys. Because I'd been in there alone, I'd taken the single. Those 2 got the bunk. They each took a long piss and went to bed. At 11, they turned the lights down, not off completely, and I sat there in what passed for darkness. You know how your eyes adjust to the light, what little light there is? I looked across the cell, which was maybe 7 by 9, and saw the 2 sleepers, both of them wrapped in white sheets up to their necks. The fat one was on the bottom. He was a stranger to me. I'd seen the skinny one around town. I was still shaking, but like I say, some part of me half enjoyed the shaking. There was a blanket I could have pulled around my shoulders, but I didn't. It's amazing what our bodies are designed to take. Helene says, I'm looking at 5 to 6 on a good day. The judge got laid the night before and had some waffles for breakfast. 8 to 10 at least if he didn't get much sleep and was suffering from an upset stomach. Possession of a controlled substance, driving under the influence of said controlled substance, driving under the influence of another controlled substance, unlawful taking of a vehicle, reckless driving, fleeing the scene of an accident, indecent exposure, failed to follow a lawful order, resisting. It was your car, I said. How was I supposed to get to work? Who was going to pick up the kids? In what? But what I'm trying to say is that while I was there, watching those guys sleep, just 2 guys snoring, coughing, gurgling, moving around, changing positions, trying to get comfortable on those slack mattresses, I felt something, let's say, beyond my immediate predicament. My mother once took me and my sister Francie to a museum. We were in Chicago visiting cousins. An Egyptian museum. What it was doing in Chicago, who knows? But there were these mummies in glass cases, and I remember how I pressed my nose against the glass and stared at the wrapped up body of a woman and wondered what she'd make of me, some 10-year-old, what, almost 2,000 years later, snooping on her infinite sleep? My nostrils up against the glass. You know how it makes you look like a pig? I was doing that. Oink, oink. I wanted to get as close as I possibly could. I whispered hello to her head, to her old head wrapped in that yellow burlap. Was it burlap they used? Hello, hello, I said. Francie asked, who are you talking to? And I said, who do you think I'm talking to? It was like that with those guys. I was only trying to get close, to establish a little camaraderie across the chasm. Do I make any sense? Except with those two, I didn't need to move towards them at all. My two fellow fuck-ups asleep in white sheets. I didn't need to move an inch. I swear. I stroked their faces without needing my hands. The skinny one had stubble. I felt it grow beneath my fingers. The fat one was clean shaven, his face slicked with sweat. And I thought, holy fuck, we're not dead. Together. As in, we're not dead together. Think of all the years we will be. Our bodies turn to caramel. I read that somewhere. You with the tiny sprouting tendrils of facial hair, you with the sweat-wet cheeks. Together at this moment, I thought, don't laugh at me, Heaney. We are not dead. You think this isn't a net positive?
Peter.
Oh, cheerful.
We'll cheer it up with a couple questions. I've audience questions, but I actually have one of my own first that I have to get answered before we go on, which is your story, The Rat, was developed into a screenplay starring Ed Asner, and I was interested in what's it like seeing another writer take your work, develop it into a screenplay, and then seeing a filmmaker develop that into a movie. Did you feel a relationship with the story once you saw it on the screen?
I did. It worked out great, but at the time it was a nightmare. I got kicked off the set because I was making so much trouble. They actually asked me to leave. And then when I wouldn't leave, they escorted me off. There was a big cinematographer. He's just like, look, Orner, get out of here. We got to do this work. But it was a blast, actually. And Ed Asner could not have been nicer to me. He's a dead ringer for my grandfather. And it just felt, when I met him, I felt like I hugged him because he was my grandfather. It's like, who the hell are you? But then we actually had a very nice time together, and we see each other on occasion. I just saw him. He was here and he was in a play. He was playing God, and in New Hampshire, and I went and saw him, and it was great. But I have to say, it's not my thing. You know, I mean, I would love it if, you know, I love the money part of all of that, but it's not what I do. I want, for better for worse, I want to create pictures in your head without any other tricks.
Is that how you got thrown off set? Like, were you trying to talk about your intention with the work, or what happened there?
The actor, the kid in the raft, is based roughly on myself, and the guy's based on my grandfather. And I was trying to coach the actor as if I knew anything about it. I knew nothing, you know, but I was, you know, there's a certain thing with that, and you have to sort of ham it. And I was like, no hamming up. And they're like, it's called acting, you know, and I'm like, it's not nuanced enough. And they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. You know,
right.
I was talking just out of my, you know.
That's great. All right, I'm going to ask you, I like this question a lot. Several of your stories sound like you were telling a story to a person sitting in a room next to you. Do you think about who you were telling your story to when you write? This is asked by Joyce.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you're hitting what makes this so different than other things for me, than other mediums. The intimacy of 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 storytelling in this medium, I feel like it is. I feel like it's one-to-one. So, you know, I have certain people I think I write to. I write to I mentioned my grandfather died at 59. I, I think I'm still in mourning for somebody I never really knew. And so I write to him a lot. I write to friends that I've lost. I write to, you know, yeah, those people, those losses we pick up. I think I write to those people.
Yeah. So somebody says, or Rachel writes, Peter, you said you missed San Francisco. Why did you leave the Bay Area, and where are you living now? And how is a new place reshaping your consciousness and your work?
I left. I took a job. I worked at San Francisco State for 15 years, and I dearly loved the school and the program. But I had an opportunity to come east and job offer at Dartmouth College, where I'm sitting, and looks like I'm in this it's like out of Central Cat. Talk about movie set. This is I work at a movie set. But you know, it was time for a change, and also, like a lot of people, I couldn't afford San Francisco. I mean, I had 2 kids, you know, and the realities were such that I had to do it for them, really, you know. And so, but I also think I'm somebody who likes to move on. I like to, and I've never felt more Californian or San Franciscan since I left. But I plan to come back, maybe to West Marin sometime sooner rather than later. And because I feel like leaving it really showed me what it meant to me.
I think this question is a good one for the teacher in you. Jeff asks, it's often said to students, write what you know, but is it maybe more stimulating for an author to put oneself in someone else's shoes, someone completely outside of one's own experience? What are your thoughts on that?
The latter. I mean, you know, there's no right or wrong way of doing it. I mean, write what you know. Sure, you could write wonderful books. We know books written by people who wrote what they know, right? And those books are fantastic. But any kind of writing advice, I run the fucking other way. I don't, you know, it's just every storyteller's individual. And so the only advice I have is write only what you want to. But I would say Eudora Welty, who's one of my absolute heroes in the entire universe. And Welty said, there's nothing harder. And I think she was not talking just about being a writer. I think she was talking about being a person. There's nothing harder than being in someone else's shoes, trying to imagine your way in someone else's shoes. We don't do nearly enough of it in every aspect of our lives, and certainly not on the page enough.
It's essentially empathy, right? It's an act of practicing empathy to step into another character.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes I think empathy kind of scares me a little bit. It's just a word.
Language, yeah.
You know how it's like kind of nowadays, it's like we want to, how can we train people to be empathetic? It just, I don't know. The empathy is the end result, maybe, to me. But I think just start with just imagining looking out through, I think this is how Welty puts it. Just imagine how the world looks from their eyes. Just start there. He doesn't even have to be sympathetic. Just start there. Just start looking. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm anti-empathy.
Well, you know, I was going to leave on that question, but I'm not leaving with that your last statement. It's like let's not let that be your virtual epitaph.
I'm kidding, but I just feel like it's a buzzword now, and let's talk about what we mean. You know, what are we talking about when we're talking about empathy?
It's like a rephrasing of Carver's, you know, what we talk about when we talk about love. I will end with a question of my own, which is, what is the one question you wish somebody would ask you in an interview?
Wow. Well, I guess we don't talk enough about what's fun about this?
Mhm.
No, I mean, I think, you know, essentially we're trying to entertain people through a connection. And I feel like that there's a great deal of fun. I mean, when things are going well, and something hard to talk about, maybe that's why people don't ask it. Like, but no one said like, what's fun about this for you? You know, and I think what's fun is just like being by myself and like making myself like laugh by imagining something. And I feel like it's sort of almost that simple in a way. And from that, then we move into what you were talking about of the desperate need that we have of seeing the world the way other people experience it and trying to imagine that. And I think it comes also from that, like not like beating over your head. I must see the world through other people's eyes. Like, why not rephrase it and like, why not have a good time doing that? Like you can make a game on it.
I love it. That's, I'm going to use that question because actually that is a question I wish I would be asked as well. Like, why do you love doing this so much? What is fun about it?
Yeah.
So thank you, Peter. We're barking up the end of our time. I always enjoy seeing you. I always enjoyed talking with you. Congratulations again on prizes and the books, and keep making great work.
Thank you, Paul. And you know, I was a fan long before we met, and having just, we met when we had coffee. What, it was like, I don't know, it feels like 10 years ago now or something. But yeah. I feel like that coffee never ended, and I so wish that we can do it again soon, but this felt a little bit like that, even though we had, I want to say thank you to the people who hung in there and listened to us. Thank you, all of you. I wish we were closer. I really do. But this is better than nothing.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And again, thank you, Jack and Litquake. And I'm going to get back to those.
This is such a great event. Thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground. I feel like we could go another hour, but I think we can't. But everyone stayed to the very end, and that means a lot. For those of you who are watching, this will be available very shortly on the Litquake Facebook page. You can rewatch it at your leisure. Once again, go buy Peter's books, go buy Paul's books, spend all the money you have on them, and check back to litquake.org for our festival coming up in October. Peter, thank you again for staying up late on the East Coast and beaming in and speaking to us. It was so great to hear your voice again.
Such a pleasure, Jack. Next time in somewhere upstate.
Right. Paul, thank you again so much, and best of luck with your books in a couple of months.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Paul Madonna month in October.
Cheers. All right.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Paul.